It's Thursday, May 16th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, there's rising poverty and food insecurity across the nation. So we are taking a national and local look at our emergency food systems, different perspectives on how they work, ongoing changes, and what else is needed to change. It's a big conversation that matters to everyone. Here's a post from Food Banks Canada from 2 weeks ago. Quote, roughly half of people in Canada are living paycheck to paycheck and are worried about feeding themselves and their families. There is nothing normal about this or the state of poverty and food insecurity in Canada. This issue requires urgent, immediate action, and we need your help. So that post 2 weeks ago, Food Banks Canada. Now, Kirsten Beardsley, Chief Executive Officer of Food Banks Canada, will be on this show around the halfway point to talk about that post and other similar posts that they've made. She will also talk about her recent trip to this province and looking at how things are operating here in Canada. She has some good stuff to say about that, but with the caveat of what is going on across the country. We will also have Catherine Scarf on the show, again, around the halfway point. Chief Program Officer, Community Food Centres Canada. So we're going to find out about those community food centres. But then again, it will be a conversation about food insecurity across the country, right? That national look. Then on the local level, the provincial level, the community level here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we're going to hear from folks with lived experience, frontline food bank experience, and community food security organizer perspectives. So joining me in the studio, we have Alison Holohan here, the East End Food Banks Coalition Coordinator. And on the line in our studio in Corner Brook, Josh Smee, CEO of Food First NL. Hi to both of you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, Josh, let's start with you. Remind folks, and I know everyone, Food First NL is in the news a fair bit, but just quickly remind folks who you are and paint this picture for us of the provincial look at food insecurity and emergency food systems with food charity.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. So Food First NL is a provincial nonprofit organization that works to advance the right to food in Newfoundland and Labrador. For us, that looks like a few things. We do advocacy work. We do organizing work with the many, many other organizations working on this issue. We take action directly with on-the-ground programs, and we do work to value people, especially valuing the voices of folks with lived experience of food insecurity, who we'll hear from on this show and others. To paint a picture of where we are in the province right now, there's been some recent data just released on food insecurity rates, and it's over 25%. So 26% of people in this province are food insecure right now. So it's 134,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And what that looks like can vary from household to household and from person to person. So when you say food insecurity, you're capturing marginal, moderate, severe food insecurity. So on the marginal end, that means you're really worried about where your food's going to come from. Moderate, things are starting to have to make compromises in what your food you're buying and eating. And then when you get into severe food insecurity, you're actually not able, you don't have enough food to eat at all, and you're going hungry. And so one thing to note is, unfortunately, with this new data, we are now the province in the country that has the highest rate of severe food insecurity. So 8.5% roughly of people in this province are severely food insecure. That means they're going hungry. We've seen a really sharp increase in that in the last year, and that's obviously a huge concern. And we know that most of this comes back to people just not having enough money to afford the food that they need, that their household needs, and that is a broad structural crisis that we're in as a country. And I think Food Banks Canada is exactly right to say this is not normal. We are in a moment of profound crisis. But within that broad structural crisis, we also are trying to do some thinking about where does the more emergency side of the food system fit in. So food banks, meal programs, those places that people go when they are going hungry, and how can that sector be supported to do their work, and how can that sector be supported to transform how they do their work so that they can support people in the best way possible. And we've been doing a lot of work on that under the heading of Rethinking Food Charity over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and we're going to be digging into that through the hour too, right? Rethinking food charity, what's been learned, what is working, what needs to change, and that it was Josh. You did a great job of framing that up there, right? Because it's okay. 26% for food insecurity in this province, 8.5 severely food insecure, leading the country in the opposite way that you would want it to be, and then just thinking about the fact that we still need emergency food systems, but it's just about looking at how they function and how they can be improved and work properly. So I want to go from you, Josh, to Alison Holohan here. And Alison, East End Food Banks Coalition Coordinator, tell us what that means.
So basically, we noticed throughout the East End Food Banks that there has been some gaps that needed to be filled. And we noticed that although the food banks are working, they're not working together. So the goal for the food bank coordination position was to come in and see how we can get a more cohesive system throughout and see how we can all support each other as a whole instead of doing it separately, right? So that's where we're at now, is filling the gaps and working towards that. Right.
Yeah, filling the gaps, working together, because food banks have operated independently, right? Like it's just wherever a food bank is, it could be a church that's running it, a community group, a not-for-profit, and folks may think they all work together, but they do not.
No, exactly. And, they're their own organization per se. So instead of having that, where are they getting food? Can we get food from this person? It's not a competition. We're all trying to work together to be able to make sure that we all have what we need to support the community.
And you're at the McSheffrey Resource Center,
Yes,
right?
McSheffrey Resource Center, formerly known as McMorran Community Center.
Yeah, bit of a name change.
Yeah. Changed the name on Friday, so still getting used to it. But it's definitely, as the center, we've noticed that instead of a community recreation side, we're so much more than that. So we put the resource center in there as well.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because community center, sometimes people tend to think like bingo and like exercise.
Yeah,
and it's like,
basketball.
hey, not to say we don't do that, but hey, we got a food bank and we're doing injections for injections and for folks at medical clinics. We've got resource centers to help folks for like navigating bureaucratic red tape online. Like
exactly.
We do English second language.
Yeah. So at the center, basically, we have the public health nurse, we have employment facilitator, we have social worker, we have so much more than just come in for a recreational program, right?
How's your food bank doing right now?
So our shelves are bare. It's not looking too good.
Shelves. So when shelves are bare at a food bank, right? Mm-hmm. What happens?
You look for donations where you can find them. You reach out to organizations, community food sharing, they're phenomenal, but they're also supporting all the other food banks. So it's hard to keep a consistent amount of food on our shelves. Our numbers have doubled since 2020, and they're only going up from here. And, it may seem like we're not getting as much donations, but we are. It's just we have so many more people who are using the food bank that it's flying off the shelves so quickly, right? So we just reach out, look for donations. A good friend of mine, Niall and Megan Hickey, are doing a month-long food drive from the Newfoundland Embassy. Mm-hmm. So if we could get organizations to do the similar part, the Newfoundland Embassy does so much for the community. It's so good for them to be able to do that, and we'd love to see more of that in terms of getting more donations and reaching out and saying, hey, do you need food? Yes, right?
So if someone shows up today, what happens?
We give them what we can, right? So instead of getting a full hamper, we'll do whatever we can to say, here you go. At McSheffrey, we do buy, personally, we have funding for the meat and the butter and the sugar and stuff like that. But, there's also only so much of that we can buy to be able to support the community. So we'll say, okay, this is what we have, here you go. And it's not always the healthiest food, but, it is, we're doing what we can, right? So
how does that, this is our system, right? How does that sit with you?
It's disheartening to see. It's heartbreaking, really, to see the people truly, truly struggling in, our community. And I know it's happening all over the city. It's really sad to understand that there's people who are going genuinely hungry and don't have food to eat, don't have food to feed their families, their children, no snacks for, after school or recess and stuff like that, right? So it's hard.
Yeah, and I always harp on this on the show, right? It goes back to, we talk social determinants of health, and the province talks about how important those things are. Well, if folks are not getting enough nutrition and enough, they don't have enough food, they're it's easy to map what can happen after that. Right?
Well, exactly. I'm a strong believer people deserve to eat with dignity, right? And they deserve to have the food that they want to have. You know, we have so many dietary restrictions coming through, whether it be health or religion, like dietary restrictions. There's people with diabetes. There's people, you know, who are celiac, and it's hard to cater to that. But obviously, we want to work towards doing that, so everybody has the ability to utilize the food banks if needed.
Haley Poudan just joined us here in studio with the Lived and Living Experience Advisory Group. Hi, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Any thoughts on what you've just heard from what we're talking about, or if and we can just jump off from there?
Yep. Well, as someone with lived experience of utilizing food banks, that's been majority 2005 to 2018 in Brampton, Ontario, from various non-for-profits, churches, just community food drives and whatnot. As a sole support single parent of one and low income, have been on and off income supports, have been full-time or part-time employed, full-time student. There's just been so many ways that I've had to navigate systems or show up on the door, finding out pantries are bare, or there's some sort of subculture of like jurisdictional limitations. So if I'm not of the postal code. So with my lived experience, it's just kind of like when you're in that moment of need, you're trying to navigate the system by yourself or with an advocate. And then when you show up and you're told that you don't qualify, it's so disheartening. And when you show up and you are told like, we don't have anything, and you see the heartbreak in like the employees' like eyes, because they know there's nothing else they can do. And that was a problem like 10, 20 years ago now in a different jurisdiction. So my experience here in Newfoundland, there was some systemic barriers, but then the only one I could access was when I was a student at MUN. So my perspective is all about, like, I guess, even watching the international students going hungry, watching everybody's hampers or monthly parcels get smaller because the demand, the need is higher, but what's coming in is barely scratching the surface of the food insecurity or affordability that people are facing.
Can you tell us about LEAG, the Lived and Living Experience Advisory Group, and what the conversations have been like around it?
Yep. So I think I happened to see an advertisement on their webpage, Food First NL, for the position of, for this volunteer committee. And pretty much there's a bunch of us that come together once a month, and we have subcommittees, and we all have different topics that we cover, like environmental, like aspects with food security or system navigation in the sense of institutional forms. I can't explain it too well right now because I'm a little bit.
Yeah, no, you're doing you're doing a great job.
Out of it, because that's why I arrived late. So, like, we gather and we speak about our lived experiences. We speak about whether we're in the metropolitan St. John's or we're in rural Newfoundland, or if we're from Labrador, we all collectively realize what we have the same and the challenges that we have differently. Like in Labrador, I had no clue how much more their food costs.
Yeah.
So if I didn't join this committee, I might not have ever known that, or I would have known it later on. And we're trying to get together to formulate like policies to suggest, or ways we can help locally within our own communities to raise awareness and to help just basically change what common people think about what food insecurity is or what to access a food bank is. And it allows us as the people with lived experience an avenue to attend places such as the Signal and speak our mind with the thankful referral from like Food First. But we are not a part of them.
Yeah.
Like, all these organizations are limited by their own policies, procedures, or etiquette, or, grant funders. So there's such a restriction on these service providers. So when I saw this opportunity, because I'm a former community development outreach worker, I have all sorts of academics behind me, but I'm also low income. I'm also a marginalized person. I'm also a person of color. So all these different intersectionalities of my identity, which qualifies me for needing assistance off and on, like, it gives me a voice to help create the social change I've experienced. It allows us to be able to advocate and be a representative for people who are just like us. And it allows Food First and now and other organizations to hear us, to gather statistics, and to, bring it more humanistic view. We're not just a statistic anymore. We are your neighbor. We're your mother. We're your father. We're somebody in this community. We're not just a bunch of have-nots that are invisible. And this committee has a living group, lived experience. Like, it helped us heal, but it also helped us be able to advocate. And a lot of times when you're in that receiver-client position, you don't have a voice.
No, right.
And that's what makes it so beautiful, because we have a voice, we have an agency kind of, I don't want to say being a gatekeeper because it sounds like they're limiting us, but it's kind of like they're opening the doors to people who are receptive so we can help try to make a difference in a way that the organizations are restrained from being able to do.
Well, actually being heard, right? So,
Yes.
like you said, voices from across the province, urban, rural, from the island, from the big land, different communities, different intersections, all talking about emergency food charity, food systems, social assistance, all of that. And then to be like, hey, here's how we think it's working. Here's our experiences. And like, what could be your experience might be slightly different than another, might be drastically different than another person's, but all that chorus together gives so much information for folks to think about and then to look at when it comes to talking about policy. Josh Smee on the line in Corner Brook there. Any thoughts on what Haley's saying? And then I want to kind of circle back to a couple of points Allison was making.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and it's really heartening. And I just want to shout out Haley and the rest of that group. I think one impact of having groups like League around is that community organizations like mine, like Allison's, we need to be challenged too. Like, part of this conversation here around food and food insecurity is that because of the systemic failure to get people enough money to live, a lot of the support system has been outsourced to our sector, to the community world. And there needs to be some accountability. There needs to be some mechanism for folks who are utilizing the services that we provide to call us out when we're not doing the right way, to provide some guidance on how to do it differently. And I think it's really important, I think, sometimes for community partners to remember that we are in positions of power, right? Like, if you're running a food bank, you're in a position of power over your service users. But if you're running an organization like mine, you're in a position of power because of doing the advocacy work that we do, for example. And so I think, what Haley's saying is really critical. And there's so many conversations happening right now that would be a lot stronger if they had more lived experience voices within them.
100%. The other question I had, right, talking to Allison Holohan here about the McSheffrey Resource Center. Allison says, shelves are bare right now. We're doing what we can. The Newfoundland Embassy is doing a fundraiser or a food drive. They're doing all the other mechanisms for trying to get food on the shelves for hampers and to give folks. Food First NL was part of a report that you mentioned, right? Rethinking Food Charity in NL. The report gets done, there's recommendations, and then here we are now hearing from Allison that the shelves are bare. What does this say to you about what needs to change with how we operate our food banks and emergency food systems?
I think it says a couple of things. And first, I think the existence of a position like Allison's is a really great step forward. Like, one of the whole category of recommendations in that report is around the need for collaboration between food programs. And this is exactly what we were hoping to see happen. So I think particularly in this province, our food banks and meal programs are really small. We don't tend to have these kind of one big food bank for your town or your city in the way that some other provinces do. And so collaboration is hugely important. I mean, I think to the broader question of, how do food programs fit in right now, part of it is just what just happened, which is raising their voices to say we cannot meet this need. There are real limits around this system, and I think it's really powerful for folks like Allison and the food banks that she works with to make it really clear to decision makers that not only have they outsourced support with food to the charitable sector, but that sector does not have the resources to meet where we are right now. That really, I think what needs to happen, I think all of us probably feel this way, that we need to light a fire under so many of these conversations. We have seen some, policy moves in the right direction with, the poverty reduction plan that got brought in. There are definite pieces of good news here, but it's moving far too slowly for the scope of the crisis that we're in. And I think food programs can play a huge role in surfacing what that looks like, what the consequences of those government decisions are on the ground.
Allison, you mentioned the rise in usage, right, at the food bank. Who are you seeing? Who are the folks that are coming by?
We're seeing a lot of new Canadians come through, because they're just coming here. They're trying to get on their feet. And, with the larger families that, typically new Canadians have sometimes upwards of 10 in a family, it's hard to be able to, keep food on the table for them, right? And also single parents, who are just trying to make lunches for their kids and stuff like that, as well as, people who are just on low income that are, like you said, living paycheck to paycheck, trying to get by. Sometimes, more times than not, it's a choice, right, between rent or food. Yeah. So it's hard, week to week, trying to make those decisions.
Yeah, and so single parents, you get some new Canadians, seniors, I'm assuming, as well.
Seniors too, yeah, definitely. We see a lot of seniors come through who need, are in need of food and utilizing the food bank, and that also falls under the dietary restrictions as well, because, we see that the older community is having more dietary restrictions with that too. So that's always a complex thing to try to maneuver through, right? Yeah.
Joining us on the line, we've got Kirsten Beardsley, the Chief Executive Officer of Food Banks Canada. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming on the show today for this discussion. I know you were just in Newfoundland, in the province, Newfoundland and Labrador, a couple weeks ago. I saw a post you put up after it, right? You said, I arrived home today after an inspiring visit to Newfoundland and Labrador. I was so incredibly struck by the care and compassion of food bankers in the province in the face of growing unsustainable need faced by so many. You go on to mention new stuff from Stats Canada, and you call it shameful new data. And that data is 23% of people living in Canada live in food insecure households. Josh Mee is on the line. For this province, it's 26%, 8.5% severely food insecure. I'd like to start with for you to expand on those thoughts about what you call shameful data, and then we could talk about your trip to Newfoundland and Labrador, if you could.
Of course. So I think we should all be ashamed as Canadians to see that the growth in food insecurity right across the country, and as you said, and even higher than the national baseline in Newfoundland and Labrador. It can't be the country we want, any of us. This is seniors going hungry. This is kids going to school hungry. This is not the country, I think. When I talk to folks across the country, this isn't what we want for ourselves. It's not just about, that's not the right thing. We don't want this. But it's also about the country we're invested in building. What's the future going to look like when we're not making sure the kids of today have the nutrition that they need to go to school and learn and thrive? What are we costing? What kinds of future are we costing ourselves if we can't get this right now? It's heartbreaking. And I have to say, I was not surprised by the StatsCan data. It's 2022 into 2023. We have seen the growth at the doors of food banks. We have been talking quite loudly about the growth in need. And it feels, unfortunately, with most governments across the country that we're not being met with a sense of urgency that we feel as folks who are on the front lines of this issue.
And below your post, I was just looking at some of the comments, right? David Long, Chief Executive Officer for Greater Vancouver Food Bank Canada, posted, I'm exhausted. Another food bank director executive wrote, ditto. And then Stuart Lilly, CEO of Refeed Farms, wrote, like you said, those are 2022 numbers. We know it's actually higher. Like for folks who are working within these emergency triage systems, for them to be posting things like, I'm exhausted. What does that say to you?
It is the single thing that keeps me up at night as CEO of Food Banks Canada, is thinking about the folks who have not let up for years, and it's getting harder than it ever has been to meet the growing need. We've got fewer people in communities who are in a position to give. We've got costs of food, which food banks do buy and other food programs do buy, so those costs are up. So I very much worry about how we sustain this. Newfoundland and Labrador has a higher percentage of food banks that are entirely volunteer run. We see that across the country. It's about 40%. It's higher in Newfoundland and Labrador. But, this is hard work to ask of volunteers, and what's going to happen when these folks appropriately take their retirement from doing this work? Who's going to step in to do this tough stuff? It's so concerning to me, and as I said, we're not being met with a sense of urgency with governments to solve this problem.
What more can be done to get folks to listen then?
I think we have a real opportunity as organizations who are all invested in seeing the need come down, to have a common voice, and to work together, and to talk to folks who use food banks and to get them involved and really build a movement. I think it's going to take all of us, with a groundswell of voices, to make sure that politicians listen.
All right, so tell me about your trip down here.
It was amazing. So I'd actually never been to Newfoundland before. I've been to every other province, but never there. And so it was really wonderful. And I was struck by a few things. I was struck by the conversations that are happening between food banks and other organizations, food justice organizations, to bring our work together and have that common voice, and to learn from each other about the folks that are doing the frontline work and the folks that are have also worked in areas of justice, and how to bring this work together. The food bank visits that I did were just so incredibly heartwarming. What I saw were mostly volunteers, as I said, who are incredibly welcoming, not judgmental, and who are working towards making sure their food banks are as supportive as possible. There were conversations about how do we do shopping models, how do we make sure the food that we're getting is culturally appropriate and has the nutrition and the quality that our clients are looking for, and how do we think differently a little bit about food banking so that it meets future needs. So We've recently introduced national standards for food banks, so there was a lot of talk of how do we as small organizations achieve those, and I was just really inspired. Mostly I was inspired by the depth of care that folks demonstrated.
So what, as we look forward then, right, you notice the depth of the care, you flagged the volunteer issue, and also, by the way, one of the demographics in this province we're aging quickly, and I think the stat I said on the show the other day is by 2043 for projections we'll be the oldest province with those demographics, right? So the volunteer base for the baby boom generation is aging, and like you said, some of those folks are people are taking the retirements from things and taking the retirements from volunteering. What do you think then should be changed looking ahead to what needs to happen for functioning here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want us to feel like there isn't hope, because in times of great adversity, innovation is the only way forward. And what I really think, and I'm really so inspired by, and I really felt when I was, in St. John's and doing some touring around, was that the future is around collaboration. It's around bridging some of the conversations that may be difficult but need to happen so that we can work together. We can think differently about, at an operational level, how do we make sure we've got, strong organizations that are resilient, that can withstand things like, volunteer shifts, that can withstand natural disasters, that can withstand some of the stresses we know are coming. And I think the answer is working together. Right. How can we do better at listening to each other, understanding each other's points of view so that we can be a stronger voice with government, a more resilient set of organizations, and a more responsive to the communities that we serve. And that, to me, the work is tough. You saw David's post about, he's exhausted, but what makes me less exhausted every day is knowing that we've got thousands of people across the country who care deeply about this, who care enough about this to volunteer on it. And I met volunteers who said, "Oh, my shift is shift is Wednesdays, and someone would pull me aside and say, she's here every day. And that's the level of dedication. We just need to work together enough to harness it so that we're unstoppable. But I actually think the next, I've said this across the country, I don't think food banking in 5 or 6 years will look much like food banking of the past. I think we're at a moment where we have to rethink a lot of things, and that's both scary, but it's also an exciting opportunity to really innovate.
Right. I think that's a great point to leave it on. I appreciate you coming on the show and talking about your trip here and talking about the national perspective. And I'm sure we'll be in touch again before too long as these changes start to come in, and we look at how things are changing with food charity. We'll get back in touch with you. And I really appreciate you making time to come on the show today.
Of course. Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Kirsten Beardsley, their Chief Executive Officer, Food Banks Canada. You are listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Today we're talking about our emergency food systems. We're talking about food charity. We're looking at how things work. We're asking about what needs to change, and we're looking at what is changing and where we need to go for things to work better. It's a big conversation. Joining me here in studio for this conversation, Haley Poudan, with the Lived and Living Experience Advisory Group, Alison Holohan, the East End Food Banks Coalition Coordinator. Alison is also with the McSheffrey Resource Center. On the phone in our Corner Brook studio, Josh Smee, CEO Food First NL. Haley, I'll go to you. Any thoughts on what you're hearing from just then for the chat with Kirsten?
Yeah, so I was reflecting in my mind about, what it meant to be a service recipient, what it meant to have to go to the food bank. And yes, a lot of it is volunteer work. And yes, a lot of it is the budget and the bureaucracy behind it. But there's also a lot of shame and stigma. And a lot of people think, oh, well, I just donate, that's fine. And it's the volunteer's job to deal with the people, and the people is their problem that they're there. So it's like people need to realize it's not if, it's when. There might be a time where you have a health issue, you're going to need to access a food bank. What's that service going to be like when you get there? And we need to realize that food is a human right. Food is dignity. Food is something we should not be ashamed about or vilifying people for if they can't provide for themselves. We need to destigmatize the fact that, it's not just supposed to be a charity system or emergency triage response. Like, food in other cultures are celebrated. Food in other cultures is a way to socialize and bond. Food in other cultures, different temples, mosques, other places, like, it's just served. It's just expected. It didn't matter what your income was. If you show up at the time that they serve meals, you're welcome to a meal. And my experience in different Catholic religious types of food bank settings, it was always shame-based. It was always, you internalize it as a recipient. So when I started to grow personally and I started to do different academics, I started to realize that a lot of North American or Westernized views of accessing a food bank is shame. It's guilt, and you have to keep it a secret. Yeah. And that's what I find very disturbing and disgusting across Canada, if that's how we have to feel as clients, if that's how we have to secure our social hierarchy and status within our
food.
Yes.
For food. Since just before Christmas, and when we've talked about food insecurity on the show, before Christmas we did a show at the St. Vincent de Paul Carbonear Food Bank, and one gentleman who came up to me, I was chatting with him, right? Haley, because you mentioned, right, you never know. Yep. So this gentleman owned businesses out west, right? Mm-hmm. And just living life, moved back home, health issue, right? Ended up having to go to a food bank, right? And in the beginning, because the shame part was also part of the conversation we had. This part was off air, but he mentioned it took a lot, right? But you never, boom, yes. Health issue, and this is where he ended up. I've been chatting with so there's yourself here today, but other folks with League, right, for the Living Experience Advisory Group. One of the people I was chatting with mentioned, if we're talking about food banks. And just life, right, as a family life. Raising children being poor is how this person put it. You can't afford milk. You can't afford fresh meat, fresh fruits. This person told me that for one of their children, getting fresh fruit is a treat, right? That's the treat. Not like a chocolate bar, right? Like it could be a once a week or once a month thing or whatever. But the treat is the thing that should be the staple every day, right?
Yes, and that's what I found interesting was the way I support myself or budget, I call it a budget, for being food insecure was like 10, 20 years ago. I could use coupons. I could, their sales stickers. There was ways where I could try to afford, although compromised in quality, the meats and the produce. Dairy was always kind of a fixed thing. Only recently I started putting like discount stickers on dairy. But now everything's been so digitalized where, okay, you have to have the app, Flash Food app. It's great, but what if you don't have a credit card to be able to pay for what you want to pick? What if you don't have the transportation to get to where you want to pick those things up? And it's like the terrain of being able to self-manage your budget, self-manage when, where, how you pick something up. At this point in time, it doesn't matter if that fresh piece of produce is full price, discount price, or some of us who have to dumpster dive. But like just to have access to that fresh piece of something, like there's no way to budget anymore. When you're this low income, when you're this desperate, when the system's been failing and no matter what you're doing to try and help yourself or help your kid, then you have to choose, do you hide the poverty from your child or do you explain what it is? And a lot of us internalize and shame ourselves or feel shame from the community around us. So you might want to shield your kid from knowing about that. But then all these other things are impacting the child, impacting you, your mental health goes down. It makes it such a struggle to access the food bank. And yes, the workers, volunteers there are usually very friendly and very warming because they know the trauma. Or if they don't know, they learn real quick that us recipients, us clients, us guests have so much trauma and baggage. And a lot of it isn't our fault. It's systemic gaps. It's institutional racism. It's all sorts of things, policies that limit what we can do. And now that inflation, like when they wanted to take away the 50% stickers and go back to 30%, it's monopolizing and basically playing with our children the access to something like fresh fruit. It is a treat.
Yeah. And another point, you mentioned transportation, right? So if you're in rural, remote areas, well, like unless it's a taxi, which is going to be it costs a lot of money. Typically, a lot of places don't have. There's no public transit, right? Within St. John. So again, talking to one of the other conversations I had with League members, one of the points that was brought up was how great the bus pass was for if you're on social assistance, but there was also the point, and this is why, and to what Josh is saying, to what you're saying, Haley, as well, for needing to listen to folks with lived experience, the point that was brought up to me was like, well, it's great. So you take the bus, you wait, you go, and you get your hamper. But then a lot of times, good luck lugging that thing back. If there's any bit of a disability or anything else, the difficulty of getting that back home, even with the bus pass. And that's something that's like, oh, but there's a bus pass. But wait. Oh, we didn't think about that, did we?
One thing that people don't realize, again, my experience with that and the bus pass and food bank system was in Ontario, but I'm not sure about the Metro Transit here. But Ontario, certain routes, certain times of the day, there was a limit as to what you could bring on board.
Oh, wow.
So,
Right.
I mean, you try to be handy and trendy and self-helping, you might get what you call a pull-along luggage, or you might have one of them foldable trolleys. But the thing was, will the bus driver let you on? Or if you appear with 2 garbage bags, will they let you bring on your 2 garbage bags? And again, it's demeaning. The bus driver may or may not have stigma, but they have their policies and procedures they have to follow. And if somehow your parcel of food, whether they know it's food or not from the food bank, you are now a problem in that different atmosphere, that different environment. So again, a different level of shame or a different level of systemic barrier.
Yeah, well, and the anxiety of just, will I have to have that conversation today?
Exactly.
Will this be yet another hurdle that I have to kind of try to get over, and I don't know how it's going to go. Maybe it will go swimmingly well, or maybe it will be the way that I'm fearing. Alison Holohan, talk to me about the discussions around like the pilot project for East End Food Bank Coalition Coordinator. And when this got started, what were the initial discussions like with other food banks for working together?
Yeah, so I mean, eager to do so because everybody understands that, you know, we need to start working more together because it's hard, right? It's hard to do it on your own. And if we work together, then maybe we can make it a little bit easier for everybody. You know, I think at first it was a little bit of little hesitant for some people because they didn't know exactly what a food bank coordinator position was.
Yeah.
So I there's people who are volunteers who have been doing this for a really long time, and they know what works, and they're doing a great job at it, right? So at first, I think it was more so of, what is she doing? Why is she coming in here? But, once you explain it and say, like, listen, I'm here to help you, and anything that you guys need, right, in terms of more training for them, food handling, food distribution, anything that we can do to make life just a little bit easier on our volunteers, and as well as the people who are utilizing the food bank as well. So that's pretty much, as a pilot, that's where I'm at for the first year, is just figuring it out, what's happening in the food banks and what necessary improvements and changes need to be made, and how can we get there as fast as possible. But it's a marathon, not a race, right?
Yeah, well, just the fact that you're looking at this now and the trying to figure this out and coordinate and have food banks work together for, we're low today. Do you have for that type of coordination? I mean, it seems like that alone is a big leap, right?
Definitely, right? And the more we communicate with each other as food banks, the more we can understand, what type of population are you serving, and is there any gaps in between? Well, this person is going to the food bank at McSheffrey, but they're regionalized closer to Divine Mercy. Like, how can we make sure that everyone is going where they need to go, so that we kind of avoid the overpopulation of too many people in this food bank when they could be using another food bank, right? And it kind of curbs the fact of, my shelves are bare because I have an influx of people coming here. So that's another big thing too, is understanding the map of where the people are living and where they're going for their food, right?
Figuring all of that out. I'll go back to the Corner Brook studio now with Josh Smee, who's sitting patiently, CEO of Food First NL. Josh, just dipping back for you, any thoughts on just these latest bits of the conversation that you're hearing?
I was really struck by what Kirsten said, that she thinks, and I think she's right, that the food banking or food charity movement is going to look a lot different in 5 years than it does now. Because I think one thing that does happen sometimes is we forget that things weren't always the way they are. So food banking, even as a concept, is only a little bit older than me. And I think that's exactly right, that there is a moment now where we can think about, what is the role of these emergency services? And I think it's possible to think of a world where there's a much better social safety net, and they're still needed. You think about, sometimes in my head where it goes is when we think about, say, eliminating homelessness, right? So when you go to cities that have reached, what you call functional zero, they still have emergency shelters often, which are the place that catches you in a brief emergency, and then you get cycled into a better system of supports. And I think, we can think about emergency food charity here as being able to provide that kind of first line of defense. And what I often think about is how food charities don't get to do that as much because folks are relying on them day in, day out, month in and month out. And the system was never designed for that. And so it's just the way it's set up now, not only is it under-resourced, but the way that resources are being directed, not by the food charities, but just by the way that the system is set up, it means that they're not able to reach that population of folks who really do, I think, in even under a much better social support system, would still maybe come knocking at that door. And so I think it's really heartening, actually, to hear Alison talk about those conversations happening within that sector. It's like, this kind of change is really hard, and it's not easy to have an organization like mine, who's kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of this sector, come in and give you a bunch of recommendations on how you're going to change. And I've actually been also honestly really surprised and heartened by the willingness to have these conversations and to rethink from the ground up, how this whole model works, because we are at risk of kind of just thinking that it's always been there and will always be here, right? And it hasn't, and it won't.
Let's go to Catherine Scarf, who's on the line, Chief Program Officer, Community Food Centres Canada. Catherine, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, good morning or afternoon.
Here's some stats. from the beginning of the show that Josh Smee, CEO of Food First NL, shared with us. The latest, right? For the Newfoundland and Labrador, 26% food insecure, 8.5% severely food insecure. That's this province. Earlier, we were talking with Kristen Beardsley as well, Chief Executive Officer, Food Banks Canada, about the high rates of food insecurity. What are your thoughts on just where things are? I believe in an email back and forth, you used the word epidemic.
Right. Well, as I heard Josh say, I think we're in danger of just getting used to this and thinking it's okay. But when you think about what that really means in human terms, I think nationally it's about a quarter of Canadians that worry about where their food is coming from, compromise on their food quality. How is this acceptable to us? I think, though, as different governments have been trying to do, there are policies underway to try and address it. At the same time, housing costs going through the roof, food costs going through the roof. We simply can't accept it, and we have to do more to keep up with this growing reality. Because at the end of the day, it's people standing in lines at food banks for a basket of food once a month that isn't, making ends meet, or coming to visit us at community food centers, and we can't fix this at the grassroots.
No, right? So what is the point of the grassroots level? Because the bigger structural issues, the bigger issue of that what you just described can't be fixed at that level. So why do we have these grassroots levels, and for what you're doing with community food centers, and what's their function?
Sure. Well, I wouldn't say it can't be fixed. We certainly spend quite a bit of time trying to get government to fix it. But in the meantime, people are struggling, and food banks are struggling to keep up. Volunteers, donors, charities, boxes of food. And at community food centers, we focus less on trying to meet basic needs because we know we can't, and we're relatively small relative to that. And we really focus on trying to bring people together around good food, around good, healthy food, to build friendships and connections and health and belonging, kids, seniors, that kind of thing. But it's really it's kind of an apples and oranges situation, if you will, because we can't fix it that way either.
Just before I let you go, because there's only a few minutes left in the show, but just tell us a little bit more about the Community Food Centers Canada and what they are doing for how they're functioning for folks.
Sure. Well, we work with about 350 partners across the country, some of them intensively to build community food centers, which, as I said, bring people together to grow, cook, share, and advocate for good food. And then we also work with the broader food movement of people who are trying to do this work to build healthy food programs that really make an impact on people's lives, increase the quality of their life and their health and belonging.
Right. Yeah. So it's about just looking at, like you said, right, food quality, increasing health, paying attention to those aspects of things, and then working in tandem with other organizations to hopefully, with the rising tide, lifting all boats for food and health for folks.
Yeah. If people want to come and cook and garden and share their knowledge and learn new things about good food and have their kids get involved, then Community Food Center is the place to go.
Catherine Scarf, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Catherine Scarf there, Chief Program Officer, Community Food Centers Canada. And what Catherine's saying reminds me a lot of anytime you get Dan Rubin on the show, right, talking about all of the efforts across Newfoundland and Labrador for folks for food security, growing food, having food community areas where folks are sharing stuff. These are also important things to think about when we talk about food insecurity in Newfoundland and in Labrador. I want to go back to the folks here in the studio. Any thoughts on what we were just hearing there, Haley?
Well, for me, it was just kind of like so heartening to see that there is a movement. There's more unification between like the national level and the provincial and the municipal level. And again, this is everybody who's involved with the food bank or food systems. I still find it kind of odd how like politically it's still somewhat taboo, or it's like dehumanized. It's just like a statistic. It's just, just an issue that's happening and we have to give some sort of response. So for me, it's just kind of like now that the food bank facilitators, resource centers, whatnot, we all seem to have the same pulse now. We all know there's a problem. We all have empathy. We all trying to figure out how to, make a movement, make a change. And it's to the rest of the people who don't use food banks, besides being donors in a position of power or anonymity, to now also raise your voice politically, contact your MPs, contact whatever, federal, provincial. We need to all work together because, again, not if, when. And it's just really, really like I had no clue there's a food bank coordinator. And, you know, I'm just so thankful because I remember when I was first using a food bank, the social service worker at the welfare center gave me a pamphlet. This is where you can go, and had all the cool graphics and cartoons that were, you know, outdated by 10 years. But they're like, yeah, contact any of these people and they can get you a food bank. And I was pregnant. I was so distraught. I had all sorts of issues and stuff going on in my head. But when I contacted everyone on those contacts, it was outdated. Either they stopped servicing, they're no longer in business, or they limited what they could give or whatnot. So to know that there's an active pulse to coordinate and to refine the system, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm so appreciative.
Happy. I'm really glad to be put into this position, you know, learning about all the stuff that's going on and the people who are utilizing the food bank. I love to hear from them because it's like, what, you're the ones that are here. You're the ones that are dealing with it firsthand. What is it that you're seeing that you think needs improvement or that is working or isn't working? Like, that's what we want to know, right? And, you know, as food banks, like, we understand where we are, but most importantly, we understand where we need to be. And that's, you know, that's why I'm here now and going to do my best and work with everybody as well. And, you know, start getting a push on the changes that need to happen, definitely.
And as we wind down the conversation, let's go back to the beginning of the show when I asked about the McSheffrey Resource Center. What's the status of the food bank there right now?
The shelves are really low, right? We don't have much food, but we have so many people in the community, you know, who need to use the food bank. So
then what would you like folks who are listening to know about this or to understand when it comes to whether it's donations or any type of communication or just an understanding around this process of what happens when the shelves are bare at at a food bank in a community in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Yeah, well, you know, people go without food and people get hungry. So to, you know, the people listening, anybody, even if it's a couple cans of soup that you have in your cupboard that you say, I'm not going to eat this, go and donate it to a food bank because that could change a family's whole day, right? To be able to have that ability. Organizations, people, anybody, you can go into any food bank and say, hey, I have a box of food here, like, take it, right? And I can guarantee you every single person working in that food bank will welcome that box of food with open arms and so much joy, right?
And like you said, the cross-section of who is going to a food bank, you're having everything from new Canadian families, single parent families. You're also having seniors in a province where 26% of folks are facing some level of food insecurity, 8.5% in severely food insecure households. Josh Smee, we've talked about the stats, we've talked about changes needing to happen, some changes that are already happening with food banks. But what is the underscoring point for recommendations around emergency food systems, or just around making sure that these, or trying to get these numbers, these percentages for food insecurity to go down instead of continuing to go up?
It's really simple. It just means getting more money to the folks who don't have enough. This is not rocket science, and I think this is one of the things that frustrates me, is that there are a lot of very complex policy problems that governments have to deal with, ones that have tons of different inputs. It's not very predictable what intervention would shift things. This is not one of those. There's tons of evidence, most recently from the Canada Child Benefit, that when you give lower income families access to more money, they're less food insecure. And so I think sometimes we lose sight of that this is a problem where it's not an issue of not knowing what to do. It's an issue of just doing it. And so I think to Allison's point, it's really important that folks make those donations to the frontline services in their community. I would only add, every time you do that, call or email your MHA. And ask them why you just had to do that, because it's not clear to me why things should be this way, and it is very much within the power of the systems that we have now to end this. And Newfoundland and Labrador has been an example on this, and we're one of the only provinces which has at any point reduced food insecurity. If you look back in the data, and I think we can do that again, but it does need to remain an absolutely top of mind issue for every politician, for every decision maker, as they think through all these different things that are landing on their desks.
Josh Smee, CEO, Food First Dunell, thank you so much for joining us from the Corner Brook studio today.
Thank you.
We're out of time, folks. Haley Poudan, Lived and Living Experience Advisory Group, thank you.
Thank you.
Allison Holohan, the East End Food Banks Coalition Coordinator. Thank you, too. Thank you for listening. We'll have the show up on YouTube this afternoon, folks, if you do want to check that out. Coming up tomorrow, Amanda Gear will be in this seat because it's the third Friday of the month, which means it is First Light Fridays. Amanda has a great show lined up. Tomorrow's show will feature conversations with elders from across the province. Do tune into that. Until tomorrow, stay safe out there, and thank you for listening.